After being rescued, an elderly raven makes his dying wish, a revelation so painful it shatters his owner's heart, unveiling a secret she never imagined. The air in Clara's small room was heavy, thick with the stillness of an impending farewell. Corvus, the elderly raven she had rescued years ago, lay on his makeshift bed, a basket lined with soft cloths. His breathing was shallow. The gleam in his black eyes, once so vivid and cunning, now dull and distant. Clara stroked his dark feathers, feeling the fragility beneath her fingertips. Tears streamed silently down her face, each drop a premature goodbye to a companion who was much more than a pet. Suddenly Corvus stirred, a subtle movement yet charged with an energy Clara hadn't seen in him for days. He lifted his head with visible effort, his eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her hold her breath. It wasn't the gaze of a dying animal, it was the look of someone with something urgent to say. "Corvus, what is it, my love?" she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. The raven opened his beak. It wasn't a common caw, nor a cry of pain. It was a series of drawn-out sounds, almost as if he were trying to form words, fighting against the weakness that consumed him. Clara, who had spent years studying Corvus's vocal patterns and remarkable intelligence, felt a shiver run down her spine. There was a cadence there, a deliberate intention that went beyond any animal communication she had ever witnessed. He repeated the sounds, this time with more clarity, a guttural sound, followed by a hiss and a click. Clara frowned, trying to decipher it. She knew Corvus's repertoire, the whistles he imitated, the few human words he could reproduce with surprising accuracy. But this was different. It was a new, urgent pattern. Corvus stretched his neck and with the tip of his beak lightly touched Clara's wrist. His eyes, previously distant, now burned with a feverish, almost desperate light. He made the sounds again, and this time Clara caught something, a name, or at least a syllable that sounded eerily familiar. "Leah?" she asked, her heart skipping a beat. Leah was her sister, missing for almost 10 years, a case the police had filed as a voluntary runaway, but which Clara had never accepted. "Did you say Leah?" Corvus cawed again, a sound of confirmation, and then, with monumental effort, he moved his head to the right, pointing towards the window, towards the outside world. His eyes returned to Clara's, pleading, and then he repeated a word he had learned long ago, but had never used in such a grave context. "Tree," he croaked, his voice hoarse and weak, but unmistakable. "Tree. Old." Clara felt her blood run cold. The old tree was a centuries-old oak at the back of the property, a place she and Leah used to frequent in childhood. But what did Corvus mean by that? And why now? He didn't stop. With the little strength he had left, Corvus dragged his beak across one of the cloths in the basket, revealing a small slit. From within, he pulled out a tiny, shining object. A mother-of-pearl button with an intricate design that Clara recognized instantly. It was one of the buttons from Leah's favorite coat, the one she wore the day she disappeared. Clara had searched for that coat for years, without success. A chill ran through Clara. This wasn't a goodbye. It was a confession, a testimony. Corvus, with his extraordinary memory, was revealing something. The urgency in his eyes, the precision of his gestures, the word tree, and now Leah's button. Everything fit into a dark puzzle she had never dared to assemble. Her heart began to pound erratically, not from sadness at Corvus's imminent departure, but from a chilling terror that settled in her soul. The truth, long buried, was beginning to emerge, brought to light by her dying raven. And she knew, with painful certainty, that what he had to say would shatter her world. The reality unfolding was so cruel and unexpected that human justice seemed too small to contain it. Clara felt the air thin, as if the oxygen had been sucked from the room. The mother-of-pearl button, cold and smooth, burned in her palm. It wasn't just an object, it was a fragment of the past. Irrefutable proof that Leah hadn't simply vanished. She had been taken, or something terrible had happened. And Corvus, her faithful raven, was the only witness. "Corvus, my God, Corvus," she whispered, her voice almost inaudible. The chilling terror that had only grazed her before now enveloped her completely, tightening its grip on her chest. "What are you telling me? What happened to Leah at the old tree?" Corvus's eyes, previously feverish, now seemed to calm a little, as if the relief of having delivered the first piece of the puzzle gave him a brief respite. He cawed again, a softer sound this time, but still laden with a silent urgency. With the tip of his beak he touched the button in her hand, then moved it in an arc, as if tracing a path. Clara watched, her mind racing in 1,000 directions. The centuries-old oak was at the back of the property, near the fence that divided the land from the dense forest. It was a place of games, of childhood secrets, but also a meeting point for local teenagers. He was there?" Clara asked, her voice choked. "Did you see Leah there?" Corvus confirmed with a slight nod. And then, he did something Clara had never seen him do with such clarity. He imitated a sound, not a caw, not a chirp, but a muffled sound, almost a groan, followed by a dragging noise. It was a sound that evoked struggle, effort. Clara felt a knot in her throat. "A noise? You heard a noise?" she asked, her voice trembling. Someone was with her?" Corvus closed his eyes for an instant, as if the memory was too painful. When he opened them, the intensity returned, but now mixed with deep sadness. He stretched his neck again, and with visible effort, dragged his beak across the cloth, drawing an irregular line. Then he tapped his beak on the cloth several times with a repetitive cadence. The rudimentary drawing, then back to Corvus. The irregular line. The repetitive taps. A fall, or blows, she murmured, her breath catching. The image of Leah, her vibrant, full-of-life sister, in a dangerous situation began to form in her mind, and she felt nauseous. Corvus didn't stop. He moved his beak to the right towards the window, and then, with a final effort, he croaked a word Clara could barely hear, but which resonated in her soul like a death knell. "Dark," he whispered, his voice almost inaudible, but laden with sinister meaning. "Dark. Earth." Clara staggered back, feeling the ground vanish beneath her feet. Dark. Earth. The old tree. Leah's button. The sound of struggle. Everything fit into a horror narrative she had never allowed herself to even consider. Leah didn't run away. Leah was buried. The tears that had previously streamed silently now gushed, not from sadness at Corvus's imminent loss, but from a searing pain and overwhelming despair at the truth he was revealing. Her sister, her sweet Leah, wasn't living a new life somewhere far away. She was dead. And her body perhaps was hidden beneath the earth, near that tree that had once been the stage for their childhood joys. Corvus, exhausted, fell back into the basket. His breathing became even shallower, almost imperceptible, but his eyes, still fixed on Clara's, conveyed a final message. The truth was out there, waiting to be unearthed. He had done his part. Clara knelt beside the basket, Leah's button clutched in her hand. Terror transformed into a cold, determined fury. Human justice had failed Leah, filing her case as a runaway, but Corvus, an elderly, dying raven, had unveiled the truth. And now Clara knew there would be no peace for her until the full truth was revealed, and justice finally was served. Clara's world hadn't just shattered. It had been rebuilt on the foundations of unimaginable betrayal and crime. and she knew the journey to unearth the truth would be long and painful. But Corvus had given her the strength to begin. The silence in the room, once heavy with sadness, was now deafening, laden with the weight of a monstrous revelation. Clara felt her blood pound in her temples, a sharp ringing in her ears that drowned out all other sounds. Her eyes, red and swollen, fixed on Corvus. He was motionless, his breathing almost imperceptible. The feverish gleam in his eyes had faded, replaced by a serene stillness, as if the burden of his secret had finally been released. "Corvus," she whispered, her voice hoarse, almost a lament. She reached out a trembling hand and gently stroked the raven's head. His feathers were cold, and his body, once so vibrant, now seemed fragile and lifeless. A final tear streamed from her eye, no longer of despair, but of deep and painful gratitude. He had waited for her, had kept that secret for years, and in his last moments had given her the most terrible and precious gift: the truth. The mother-of-pearl button was still in her palm, a small, cold testament. Leah, the old tree, dark, earth. Corvus's words echoed in her mind like a macabre mantra. The image of Leah, not fleeing to a new life, but being silenced and buried, was a sharp knife in her chest. The police. They had dismissed the case. Voluntary runaway, they said. How could they have been so blind? Or worse, so negligent? A cold rage began to settle in Clara, replacing the initial shock. It wasn't an explosive rage, but a constant, icy flame that promised to burn until the truth was exposed. She rose slowly, her legs shaky, but her mind sharper than ever. She looked out the window, at the darkness beginning to envelop the yard, at the imposing silhouette of the centuries-old oak that stood at the edge of the property. "I won't disappoint you, Corvus," she promised, her voice firm despite the tremor. "I will unearth this, for Leah, for you." She knew she couldn't just go to the tree with a shovel. Not now. The scene of the possible crime, if that's what it was, would be compromised. She needed evidence, a plan. She needed someone who would take her seriously, someone who wouldn't dismiss her as a grieving sister clinging to a fantasy. But who? The police had already failed. Clara walked to the small bookshelf, her eyes scanning the titles until she found what she was looking for, an old leather-bound diary Leah used to keep. She opened it, the yellowed pages smelling of time and memories. Leah was meticulous. She loved to record her thoughts, her encounters, her little secrets. Perhaps there was something there, a clue, a name, a date that Corvus couldn't express. As she flipped through the pages, Clara's mind worked feverishly. She needed to act cautiously but urgently. The truth was out there beneath the earth, and every minute that passed was another minute of impunity for whoever had done this to her sister. Leah's button, still in her hand, seemed to pulse with an energy of its own, a silent call for justice. She looked at Corvus one last time, her faithful companion, now at peace. He had delivered his testimony. Now it was her turn. Clara's world had changed forever. The innocence of a peaceful life shattered into 1,000 pieces, revealing a dark landscape of secrets and betrayals. But in the midst of the darkness, a new determination had been born. She would be Leah's voice, the hand that would unearth the truth, the strength that would seek justice. The journey would be long, dangerous, and perhaps lead her to places she never imagined, but there was no turning back. She sat at the desk under the faint light of the lamp and opened the diary. Leah's handwriting, elegant and fluid, filled the pages. Dates, friends' names, teenage outpourings about crushes and frustrations. Clara flipped through, her mind working feverishly, searching for any anomaly, any mention of the oak, a secret meeting, a hidden fear. The first pages were innocent, full of dreams and plans for the future. But as she progressed to the months preceding Leah's disappearance, the tone began to shift. Small enigmatic phrases, hurried scribbles, the repeated mention of a name. Gabriel. Leah wrote about furtive meetings, about the thrill of the forbidden, and a growing sense of apprehension. He's changing. Leah had written in one entry, the ink smudged as if a tear had fallen there. I don't know if I recognize him anymore. He scares me sometimes. Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. Gabriel. She remembered him. An older boy with a somewhat dubious reputation whom Leah had secretly started dating shortly before she disappeared. Clara's parents disapproved, and Leah had promised to end the relationship. But the diary told another story. In one of the last entries, dated just 2 days before her disappearance, Leah had written, "He wants me to meet him at the old tree, at night. He said it's important, that we need to talk. I'm scared, but I have to go. He won't leave me alone if I don't." Painful leap. He won't leave me alone. Corvus's words, tree, dark, earth, the sound of struggle, took on a new and terrifying meaning. Gabriel. He was there. He was the missing piece in Corvus's macabre puzzle. The rage that had been cold before now burned with renewed intensity. Gabriel. He had been questioned by the police, but always denied any involvement, claiming Leah had broken up with him and that he hadn't seen her for weeks. The police accepted his version without questioning. Clara closed the diary, the cold leather against her fingers. Leah's button was still in her hand, a tangible link to the past and the hidden truth. She had a name, a motive, a location. It wasn't enough for the police, perhaps, but it was enough for her. The journey would be long and dangerous, but Corvus had given her the first step, and now she was no longer alone in her quest for justice. Leah, she knew, was crying out for her, and Clara would be her voice. Clara reread the last diary entry, Leah's words dancing before her eyes in a macabre dance. "He wants me to meet him at the old tree, at night. He won't leave me alone if I don't." The smudged ink, the hesitant stroke at the end, everything screamed despair. There was no more room for doubt. Corvus hadn't imagined it. He had witnessed it. The name Gabriel echoed in Clara's mind, heavy and dark. She remembered him, of course, a year older than Leah, with a smile that was too easy and a gaze that never seemed to reach his eyes. Clara's parents considered him a bad influence, and Leah, always the obedient daughter, had promised to end the relationship. But Leah was also stubborn, and the diary revealed the persistence of a forbidden love, or perhaps an obsession. The police at the time had questioned Gabriel. He had maintained a facade of calm, denying any involvement, stating that Leah had broken up with him and that he hadn't seen her for weeks before her disappearance. His version, conveniently, fit the voluntary runaway theory that the police had so easily embraced. No one had questioned enough. No one had searched enough. Clara felt a wave of nausea. The negligence, the willful blindness of the authorities was as revolting as the revelation itself. They had closed the case, turned the page, while her sister lay. Where? Beneath the old tree, in the dark, in the earth. Corvus's words materialized in her mind with terrible clarity. The sound of struggle, the button, everything fit into a mosaic of horror. She closed the diary with a soft thud, the sound reverberating in the heavy silence of the room. The mother-of-pearl button was still in her palm, now not just a testimony, but a silent accusation. Gabriel, he was the key. He was the monster. The rage, previously cold and contained, now burned in her chest like a private hell. It wasn't an uncontrolled rage, but a driving force, a silent promise of retribution. She couldn't go to the police with an old diary and the testimony of a dead raven. They would institutionalize her, or at the very least ignore her again. She needed more. She needed irrefutable proof. Her eyes swept the room, stopping at Corvus's inert body. He had done his part. Now the responsibility was hers. She rose, her mind working at high speed. Where was Gabriel now? Did he still live in town? Had he moved? She needed information, a starting point. Clara picked up the phone, hesitating. Who could she contact? Her parents were devastated by Leah's disappearance and would never endure reliving the pain, much less the idea of a murder. Friends? Many had drifted away over time, or wouldn't take her story seriously. Suddenly, a name surfaced in her mind, Detective Miller. He had been the officer in charge of Leah's case at the time, an older man, with tired eyes, but who always seemed to harbor a hint of doubt, a lingering dissatisfaction with the case's conclusion. He had retired a few years ago, but Clara remembered hearing he still lived in the region. It would be a shot in the dark, but it was the only chance she saw of having someone with investigative experience by her side, someone who might see beyond the apparent madness of her story. She needed an ally, a guide in this labyrinth of pain and secrets. With Leah's diary firmly in one hand and the mother-of-pearl button in the other, Clara felt a new kind of courage. It wasn't the courage of recklessness, but that of unwavering determination. She would bring justice to Leah and to Corvus. The journey would be solitary and dangerous, but she was no longer lost. She had a name and a mission. Dawn was approaching, but the darkness she was about to unearth was far deeper than the dissipating night. Clara remembered how he looked at her during the interrogations, with a mixture of pity and a curiosity that seemed to go beyond protocol. He had retired a few years ago, but Clara recalled hearing he still lived in the region, perhaps in a country house a little outside of town. With trembling hands, Clara searched her mother's old phone book, which held old contacts. There it was. Det, Miller, police, former. Beside it, a residential number scribbled in pencil. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. It was early, but urgency propelled her. Dialing the number, each tone seemed amplified in the silence of the house. 1, 2, 3 rings. Finally, a hoarse voice answered, sounding somewhat sleepy. "Hello?" said the voice. "Detective Miller?" Clara asked, her voice choked with emotion and nervousness. There was a pause. "Who is this?" "It's Clara Mendez, Leah Mendez's sister." Another pause, longer this time. Clara could almost feel the memory of Leah's case resurfacing in the man's mind. "Clara, it's been a long time. Has something happened?" Miller's voice now had a cautious tone, that of an old police officer who knew that morning calls rarely brought good news. "Yes, Detective, it has. I've discovered things about Leah, things the police never knew, things that change everything." Clara tried to keep her voice steady, but emotion overflowed. "I know it sounds crazy, but I need you to listen to me. I need you to see what I have." Miller sighed. "Clara, I've been retired for years, and your sister's case was closed." "I know," she interrupted him, her voice almost a cry of despair. "But it was closed wrongly. Leah didn't run away, Detective. She was silenced. And I know who did it, and where she is." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Clara waited, the phone heavy in her hand. For a moment, she feared he would hang up, that he would dismiss her as a grieving woman gone mad. "Silenced, you say?" Miller finally spoke, his voice deeper with a hint of something Clara couldn't identify, curiosity, skepticism. "Where are you, Clara?" "At my house, my parents' old house. I'll be there in an hour. Don't touch anything and don't tell anyone." His voice was now that of a police officer again, the authority and seriousness unmistakable. Clara hung up, relief and terror mixed in an overwhelming wave. He would come. He would listen to her. She would bring justice to Leah and to Corvus. She had a name and a mission. The first step had been taken. Clara hung up the phone, the sound of the final click echoing in the silence of the house. The initial relief of having Miller on her side was quickly replaced by a wave of terror. He would come in an hour. And then she would have to unearth the truth, not just for herself, but for a man who had seen the worst of humanity. A man who could easily dismiss her as a grieving woman, gone mad. The weight of Leah's diary in her hands seemed to grow, her sister's words burning in her mind like embers. She walked to the window, watching the sky begin to lighten, tinged with soft shades of pink and orange. A new day was dawning, but for Clara it was the beginning of a darkness she was about to unearth. The morning peace contrasted brutally with the storm in her chest. Her eyes returned to Corvus, still on the table. The small, inert body was a silent reminder of the promise she had made. He had spoken. Now she needed to be Leah's voice. The hour that followed was an eternity. Clara tried to organize her thoughts, mentally rehearsing what she would say. How to begin? How to explain that a raven had revealed a murder? She knew the story would sound absurd. She needed to be concise, direct, and present the evidence irrefutably. The diary, the mother-of-pearl button, and perhaps Corvus's silent presence, the last link to the truth. She took Leah's diary and the button, placing them carefully on the small coffee table in the living room, where she planned to receive Miller. She wanted everything to be in plain sight, no hiding places, no artifices. The faint dawn light began to invade the room, illuminating the dust suspended in the air, the marks of time on the furniture. The house, once a refuge of memories, now seemed like the setting for a drama about to unfold. Clara felt a chill. The rage that propelled her was a constant flame, but fear was also present. Fear of not being believed, fear of Gabriel, fear of the truth that was about to explode into their lives. She made strong coffee, the bitter aroma filling the room, trying to calm her nerves. Every noise outside seemed like the sound of an approaching car, every shadow an omen. Finally, the unmistakable sound of an engine stopped at the driveway. Clara's heart pounded. She took a deep breath, trying to control the tremor in her hands. The doorbell rang, a jarring sound that made her jump. Clara opened the door. There he was, Detective Miller. He looked older than she remembered, with thinner grey hair and deep wrinkles around his tired yet still perceptive eyes. He wore a worn leather jacket and jeans, more a retired man than an officer on duty, but the aura of authority still enveloped him. "Clara," he said, his voice hoarse, his eyes sweeping her face, searching for something, perhaps confirmation of her sanity or proof of her madness. "Detective Miller," Clara replied, her voice steadier than she expected. She invited him in, closing the door behind him. He stepped into the living room, his eyes immediately falling on the diary and the button on the coffee table. He said nothing, just watched Clara, waiting. "Thank you for coming," Clara began, gesturing for him to sit. He sat in an old armchair, the leather creaking under his weight. "You said you discovered things. That Leah didn't run away," Miller said, his voice calm, but with an intensity Clara recognized, "and that you know who did it and where she is." Clara nodded, feeling a knot in her throat. "Yes, it's a story. Difficult to believe, but I have the evidence, and I know that you, unlike others, always had a hint of doubt about Leah's case." Miller met her gaze. "I always had doubts when the pieces didn't fit perfectly, Clara. Your sister's case. There were gaps, but without new evidence, there was nowhere to go." "The evidence is here, Detective," Clara said, her voice choked with emotion, but laden with unwavering determination. She pointed to the diary. "It starts with this, Leah's diary, and with something she never had the chance to tell." She picked up the diary, her hands trembling slightly, and opened it to the final page. "He won't leave me alone if I don't go," she read aloud, her voice almost a whisper. "And then, Detective, then there was Corvus. Miller frowned, curiosity beginning to replace skepticism in his eyes. Corvus, the raven you rescued? Clara nodded, pointing to the room where Corvus's body still lay. He was the witness no one expected. He told me what happened, in his last breaths. Detective Miller looked at the room, then at Clara, a complex expression on his face. He didn't say it was madness. He just waited. He told me the name, Detective, the monster's name, Clara continued, her voice gaining strength. He told me where Leah is, and he gave me this. She held out her hand, revealing the mother-of-pearl button in her palm. This is Gabriel's, I'm sure. The silence in the room was dense, heavy with the truth about to be revealed. Miller picked up the button, his wrinkled fingers examining the object with forensic attention. His eyes, previously tired, now gleamed with a new light, the light of a hunter who had just sniffed out a long-forgotten trail. The game had begun. Miller held the mother-of-pearl button, his rough fingers tracing the smooth, cold contours of the object. His eyes, previously fixed on the button, rose to meet Clara's, a mix of skepticism and a spark of recognition dancing in them. Gabriel, you say, he murmured, his voice grave. Gabriel who? Gabriel Vasconcelos, Clara replied, her voice choked but firm. Leah's fiancé. The man the police never truly investigated because he had a perfect alibi and an impeccable reputation. Miller nodded slowly, a deep furrow forming between his brows. I remember Vasconcelos, an influential man. His alibi was solid, yes. Witnesses, travel records. It seemed unquestionable at the time. And it was a sham, Clara retorted, rage bubbling in her chest. Corvus told me. He saw. He was there. Detective Miller blinked, and a heavy sigh escaped his lips. He placed the button back on the table, but his eyes didn't stray from it. Clara, I understand that grief can make people see things, hear things, but a raven, no matter how intelligent, it can't testify in court. I know what you must be thinking, Clara said, her voice almost a whisper of despair. That I've gone mad. But Corvus didn't speak in words, Detective. He showed me. He made me understand. He gave me clues. He gave me the name. And he gave me this. She pointed to the button. He took it, from Gabriel, on the day Leah disappeared. Miller picked up Leah's diary, carefully flipping through the pages, his eyes scanning the small print. He stopped at the last entry, reading it in silence. He won't leave me alone if I don't go, he read aloud, the same sentence Clara had read. That's concerning, but it doesn't directly point to Vasconcelos. But it points to someone who was threatening her, Detective, Clara argued, her voice gaining strength, and Leah was afraid of Gabriel. She wrote about it in other parts of the diary, about how possessive, how controlling he was, about arguments they had, and about a secret she discovered about him, something she couldn't reveal, but which terrified her. Miller closed the diary, his eyes fixed on Clara. What secret? Clara hesitated, remembering Corvus's words, the image he had projected into her mind. Corvus showed me. Gabriel was involved in something illegal, something big. Leah found out and threatened to expose him. That's why he silenced her. The silence in the room deepened. Miller no longer seemed skeptical, but rather thoughtful, as if he were assembling a complex puzzle. He picked up the button again, turning it between his fingers. This button, he said, his voice lower. Are you sure it's Gabriel's? Absolutely, Clara replied. He had a wool coat he wore often, with buttons exactly like this. I remember. Leah even used to joke that he looked like an English lord in that coat. Miller stood up, walking to the window, watching the rising sun. If what you say is true, Clara, we're talking about a massive cover-up and a very dangerous man. He turned to her, his eyes piercing. Where did Corvus say Leah is? Clara swallowed hard, her throat dry. He showed me a place, an old cabin near the lake on a property Gabriel inherited from an uncle. An isolated place he used for hunting. No one would ever look there. Miller returned to the armchair, his gaze fixed on the diary and the button. Clara, what you're asking me to do is reopen a cold case, based on the testimony of a raven and a diary that by itself isn't conclusive proof of murder. He paused, and Clara felt her heart sink. But I always had a gut feeling about Leah's case, those gaps, the way Vasconcelos behaved, so calm, so perfect. And this button. He picked up the button once more, examining it under the dim light. It's a physical clue. And the diary. It provides a motive. And the cabin. It's a place that was never checked. He looked her in the eyes, his expression serious. I can't promise anything, Clara, but I will investigate. For Leah, and for you. But you need to understand, if Gabriel Vasconcelos is involved, he is a man with resources and connections. This will be dangerous for both of us. I don't care, Clara said, her voice filled with fierce determination. I just want justice for Leah and for Corvus. Miller nodded, a glint of respect in his tired eyes. Right. First, we go to the cabin, but not alone. I'll make some calls. And Clara, you're not going to tell anyone about this, no one, especially not Gabriel Vasconcelos. Clara felt a mix of relief and terror. He believed her, or at least was willing to give her story a chance. The truth was finally beginning to surface, but the journey that was starting would be long and full of dangers. The game, indeed, had only just begun. Detective Miller nodded, his eyes fixed on the mother-of-pearl button, as if it held the key to a years-old enigma. The glow of the rising sun, which had once seemed a harbinger of hope, now cast long, unsettling shadows across the room. Right, Clara, he said, his voice firmer, retirement seeming to recede from him like a mist. My first call will be to an old colleague, one I trust. He's still active and discreet. We need backup, but we can't raise unnecessary alarms, especially not if Gabriel Vasconcelos is truly involved. Clara felt a knot in her stomach. The mention of Gabriel's name, now not just a suspicion, but an almost formal accusation, made everything more real, more dangerous. What will we do? She asked, her voice a little shaky. We're going to that cabin, Miller replied, picking up Leah's diary and the button, carefully placing them in a small plastic bag he took from the inner pocket of his jacket. But with caution. We can't just barge in. We need a warrant, or at least a strong justification to be there. My colleague can help us with that. He can stumble upon an anonymous tip about suspicious activities on the Vasconcelos property, something that gives us a legal entry point. He turned to Clara, his expression grave. Meanwhile, you stay here. Don't leave, don't talk to anyone, and above all, don't try to contact Gabriel Vasconcelos. If he is what you say he is dangerous, and he cannot know we are coming. Clara nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility. Adrenaline coursed through her veins, mixed with a chilling fear. What if he knows? What if he already knows I'm investigating? Miller paused, thoughtful. It's a possibility, but he has no way of knowing about Corvus. And the diary, well, he might have thought you'd dismiss it as delusions of grief. The button is what changes everything. It's the physical evidence. But he doesn't know you have it. Keep that in mind. Surprise is our greatest weapon. He took out his cell phone, dialing a number. Clara watched him, feeling a glimmer of hope, but also growing anxiety. The wait would be torturous. Hello, Frank. Miller here. Yes, it's me. I need a favor, a big favor. It's about an old case. Leah's, Clara's sister. Yes, that one. I have some new information and it's explosive. I need you to put together a small, discreet team, and I need a search warrant for an isolated property near the lake. The old Vasconcelos hunting cabin. Yes, those Vasconcelos. No, I can't give too many details over the phone, but trust me, Frank, this is big, and it could be dangerous. Clara listened to the conversation, her heart pounding. Miller was acting. The rusty, slow machine of justice was starting to turn again, propelled by the truth whispered by a raven. Miller hung up the phone, turning to Clara. Frank will be here in about an hour with a team. He'll get the warrant. We can't waste time. The faster we act, the less time Gabriel will have to react if he's involved. An hour, Clara repeated, her voice almost inaudible. Time seemed to stretch and shrink simultaneously. An hour for the truth to be unearthed. An hour for her life to change forever. She looked at Corvus's room, feeling a pang of gratitude and sadness. He had kept his promise. He had given her the key. Now, it was up to her and Detective Miller to open the door. "I'll make more coffee," Clara said, trying to find something to do with her trembling hands. "And maybe something to eat. We'll need energy." Miller nodded, a tired but determined smile on his face. "Good idea. It's going to be a long day, Clara, a day that could change everything." Clara knew it. The silence in the house, previously filled with pain and uncertainty, was now a prelude to the storm. The truth was on its way, and with it, justice. But the path there would be treacherous. The game had only just begun, and the stakes were as high as possible. Miller paused, thoughtful, walking to the window and looking out at the garden, as if searching for answers in the dewy leaves. "It's a possibility. And the diary. It's the physical evidence. Keep that in mind. Surprise is our greatest weapon." He turned, his expression grave. "Do you have any weapons in the house, Clara? Or anything to protect yourself?" Clara shook her head. "No, never needed to." "Right. Stay close to me when Frank arrives. Don't stray. We don't know what we might find there." Miller took Leah's diary and the button. Carefully placing them in a small plastic bag, he pulled from his inner jacket pocket. "These stay with me. They are our main evidence." Clara looked at Corvus's room, feeling a pang of gratitude and sadness. The image of Corvus, with his wise eyes and peculiar intelligence, filled her mind. He had guided her even in his last breath. And maybe something to eat. Good idea. As Clara headed to the kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee beginning to spread through the house, the silence in the living room seemed to thicken. Every minute that passed was a torment. She imagined Leah, her sister, somewhere, perhaps in that isolated cabin, waiting for justice. And Corvus, the wise raven, who had carried this secret for so long, finally finding peace in revealing it. The distant sound of an approaching car made Clara's heart pound again, but this time the engine's rumble was heavier, more deliberate. She looked at Miller, who was already standing, his hand instinctively touching the empty holster at his waist, his eyes fixed on the door. It wasn't a neighbor, it was the arrival. Minutes later, a discreet black SUV pulled up in front of the house. 3 men emerged. One, tall with neatly trimmed grey hair, was Frank. He had Miller's same serious demeanor, but with younger energy and a keen gaze. The other 2 were younger, with focused expressions, wearing dark jackets that barely concealed the bulk of equipment beneath them. Miller opened the door before they could knock. "Frank, thanks for coming so quickly." "Miller, you said it was urgent, and that it involved the Vasconcelos." "That's always urgent," Frank replied, extending his hand for a firm shake. His eyes swept the room, stopping at Clara. "Is this Clara?" "Yes, Clara, this is Detective Frank Silva, and these are Agents Torres and Mendez." Clara nodded, feeling small under Frank's assessing gaze. "Thank you for coming." Frank nodded. "Miller gave me a summary. It's quite a story. The warrant is with me." He pulled a sealed envelope from inside his jacket. "I secured a search warrant based on an anonymous tip about suspicious activities on the Vasconcelos property. It's not ideal, but it gives us a legal entry point without raising immediate red flags about Gabriel. Miller took the envelope, quickly examining it. Perfect. We need maximum discretion. Gabriel Vasconcelos cannot know we're coming or that Clara is involved. Understood, Frank said, turning to his agents. Torres, Mendes, I want you to set up a discreet perimeter around the cabin. Don't get too close until we're sure the area is secure. Any suspicious movement, any person, notify me immediately. No confrontations unless absolutely necessary. The agents nodded, their voices professional and concise. Yes, sir. Miller turned to Clara. Clara, you're coming with us. You're the witness, and you can help us identify anything Leah might have left behind. But you stay behind me at all times. Don't take any risks. Clara's stomach churned. Going there, seeing the cabin, the place where Leah might have spent her last moments, was terrifying, but she couldn't back down. Corvus had trusted her. I understand. Right, let's review the plan, Miller continued, his voice serious. The cabin is isolated near the lake. We don't know what we might find. Gabriel Vasconcelos is an influential man, and if what Corvus said is true, he is dangerous. We need to be prepared for anything. Frank, you'll lead the entry. Clara and I will follow. Torres and Mendes, you maintain surveillance and cover our rear. Frank nodded. The car's ready. We'll use mine. It's less conspicuous. As they prepared to leave, Clara grabbed a bottle of water and a coat. The sun was already higher, but the morning air was still cool. She looked at Corvus's room one last time, a silent prayer on her lips. Thank you, my friend. The drive to the cabin was made in tense silence. Frank's SUV glided along the rural roads, each kilometer feeling like an eternity. Clara watched the landscape pass, her mind a whirlwind of memories of Leah, Corvus's hoarse voice, and Gabriel Vasconcelos's cold face. With each curve, the anxiety grew, a tight knot in her chest. Finally, Frank slowed down. We're almost there. The cabin is about 500 meters away after that right turn. It's well hidden by the vegetation. Clara felt a shiver. The truth was there, waiting. Justice was on its way, but the path there would be treacherous, and Clara knew there was no turning back. She clenched her hands, ready to face whatever was hidden in the darkness of that cabin. Frank's SUV stopped at a strategic distance, hidden by a dense curtain of trees. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant song of a bird. Clara felt her heart pound erratically, a furious drum against her ribs. The cabin was there, just meters away, invisible yet palpable in her mind. All right, Frank said, his voice low but firm, breaking the spell of silence. Torres, Mendes, you know what to do. Maintain discretion. Anything, any movement, notify me by radio. Miller, Clara, stay with me. The two agents nodded, their figures quickly blending into the dense vegetation, moving with the precision of predators. Clara watched them disappear, feeling a pang of apprehension. The forest, once a refuge of peace, now seemed like a labyrinth of secrets and dangers. Miller turned to Clara, his serious blue eyes on her. Remember what we talked about, Clara. Stay behind me, don't stray. We don't know what we're going to find. Clara swallowed hard, nodding. The air was cold and she tightened her coat around her body, more to contain the internal tremor than to protect herself from the weather. The image of Leah smiling, dancing, filled her mind, followed by the dark vision of Corvus, his black eyes conveying the truth. Everything converged to this moment. Let's go this way, Frank indicated, pointing to an almost imperceptible trail covered by dry leaves and branches. It's the safest and least visible route. They began to walk, their steps careful not to make noise. With each meter, the vegetation grew denser, the trees taller, forming a canopy that filtered the sunlight, creating a dark and oppressive atmosphere. Clara smelled damp earth and decaying leaves, an aroma that mingled with her own fear. She tried to focus on her breathing, on the sound of her own footsteps, on anything that could ward off the avalanche of thoughts threatening to crush her. Suddenly, Frank stopped, raising his hand. Miller and Clara froze. Absolute silence settled, broken only by the distant sound of a stream. Frank brought the radio to his ear. "Frank here. Anything, Torres?" Torres's voice crackled, low and professional. "Perimeter secure, sir. No visible activity. The cabin is well hidden. It looks abandoned, but there are signs someone has been here recently. A faint trail, some footprints." "Understood. Maintain position. Do not approach the structure." Frank put away the radio, turning to Miller and Clara. "Looks like we're on the right track. But double caution. Signs someone has been here recently could mean anything." They resumed walking, the tension increasing with each step. Clara felt a strange mix of terror and an almost feverish urgency. She wanted the truth to be revealed. No matter how painful, Leah deserved it. Corvus deserved it. Finally, the vegetation began to open up. Between the trees, a dark, rustic silhouette emerged. It was the cabin. It looked small and forgotten, its dark wooden walls almost swallowed by moss and ivy. The windows, small and dusty, were like empty eyes observing the world with a somber indifference. A stone chimney, covered in soot, pointed to the sky, but there was no smoke. That place, so isolated, so silent, seemed to scream secrets. She imagined Leah there, perhaps scared, perhaps alone. The pain in her chest intensified, mixing with rage. Frank and Miller approached with extreme caution, their hands already on their holsters. Clara stayed a little behind Miller, her eyes fixed on the heavy wooden door, which seemed to seal a fate. There were no signs of life, no sound, just the whisper of the wind through the trees. "Looks like no one's here," Miller murmured, more to himself than to the others. "But we can't be sure." Frank nodded. "I'll check the door. Miller, cover me. Clara, stay exactly where you are." Clara nodded, her hands clenched into fists. She watched Frank approach the door. His posture tense and alert, he tested the doorknob, which yielded with a low, ghostly creak. The door was unlocked. A sepulchral silence fell upon them. The door, slightly ajar, revealed only an impenetrable darkness within. The air felt heavier, laden with a grim expectation. What awaited them? The truth finally was one step away from being revealed. The game hadn't just begun. It was about to reach its climax. Frank pushed the door with the tip of his foot, and it creaked, opening fully into the gloom. The smell emanating from within was a mix of mold, dust, and something more subtle, almost metallic, that made Clara's stomach churn. Miller switched on the flashlight in his hand, and the beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing a small, cluttered interior. The cabin consisted of a single room, with a stone fireplace on one wall and a makeshift bed in the opposite corner. A rustic table covered in a thick layer of dust stood in the center, and a few wooden chairs were overturned. Everything seemed abandoned for years, but the feeling that someone had been there recently was undeniable. "Maintain caution," Frank murmured, his voice low and tense. He entered first, sweeping the room with his flashlight, his eyes alert to every shadow. Miller followed, positioning himself to cover the entrance, and Clara, who remained motionless, wide-eyed, trying to absorb every detail. Clara felt her heart pound in her chest. Every object, every stain on the wall seemed to whisper a story. She imagined Leah there, perhaps sitting at that table, perhaps lying on that cold bed. A wave of sadness and rage washed over her. Frank began to inspect the place methodically, moving with the precision of a hunter. He checked the fireplace, the dark corners, the small window overlooking the forest. Miller, in turn, focused on the bed and the surrounding area. "It seems no one is here now," Frank said, his voice a little more relaxed, but still cautious. "But Torres was right. There are signs someone has been here." He pointed to an empty water bottle and a cookie wrapper, both relatively new, discarded near the fireplace. Clara moved a little, her eyes fixed on the bed. It was a thin mattress, covered by a dirty, crumpled sheet. Something about the disarray there seemed more recent, more intimate. She felt a tug in her chest, a strong intuition. "Miller!" Clara called, her voice a hoarse whisper. "The bed! Look under the bed!" Miller turned to her, surprised by the urgency in her voice. He knelt, pointing the flashlight under the mattress. There was a small wooden box, hidden between the floorboards and the bed frame. It was dusty, but didn't seem as old as the rest of the cabin. "Bingo!" Miller murmured, reaching out to pull the box. It was small, the size of a thick book, and heavy. He placed it on the table, and Frank approached, his eyes fixed on the object. "Don't touch anything without gloves," Frank instructed, already pulling on his own. He opened the box carefully. Inside there were a few items, a small silver locket, tarnished and with a broken chain. Clara recognized it immediately. It was the locket Leah always wore, a gift from her grandmother. Her eyes filled with tears. Beside the locket there was a small hardcover notebook with yellowed but intact pages, and to everyone's shock, a piece of dark fabric, irregularly stained. It wasn't blood, but something dark and dry, with a faint, sweetish smell. Frank picked up the notebook carefully. "Looks like a diary." He opened it to the first page. The handwriting was familiar to Clara. It was Leah's hand. "It's hers," Clara managed to say, her voice choked. She reached for the locket, but Miller held her back. "Don't touch it, Clara. It's evidence." His eyes were fixed on the diary in Frank's hands. Frank began to flip through the pages, his eyes scanning the words. With each sentence, his expression grew darker, more tense. He stopped on a page, reading aloud, his voice grave and controlled. "He brought me here, said it was for our safety, to isolate ourselves from the world. But I know it's a prison. He's different. His eyes, they're not the same. I heard him on the phone talking about solving the problem. I'm scared. For the baby. For my baby." Clara let out a muffled sob. Leah's words, read aloud in that grim place, were a blow to the heart. Corvus's truth, the raven's testimony, took raw and painful form. Frank continued, turning another page. "He gave me something to drink, said it was to calm me down, but I feel so weak, so dizzy. He's coming. I don't know what's going to happen. If anything happens to me, if anything happens to my baby, please, someone needs to know. Gabriel, he's a monster. He didn't want the baby. He said it was a mistake. He forced me. I didn't want to. I didn't want to." Frank's voice faltered, and he stopped reading, his face pale. The silence that followed was deafening, filled only by Clara's sobs. Leah's locket, the diary, the stained fabric, everything fit into Corvus's grim narrative. Gabriel Vasconcelos wasn't just an influential man, he was a murderer. And Leah, his own wife, and the child she carried, were his victims. Miller knelt beside Clara, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Clara, we found it. We found the truth." Clara couldn't respond. She just cried. Pain and rage mixing in an overwhelming whirlwind. The game hadn't just begun, it had reached its climax. The truth was there, brutal and undeniable. Now justice would have to take its course, no matter how complex or dangerous the path. The air in the cabin was heavy, not just with the smell of mold and dust, but with the overwhelming weight of the truth. Clara couldn't stop crying, each sob tearing at her throat, echoing the pain Corvus had tried, in vain, to prepare her for. Leah's words, read by Frank's grave voice, were a brutal testament, a cry for help from the past, finally heard. Miller, still kneeling beside Clara, squeezed her shoulder firmly. "Clara, breathe. We have everything, the diary, the locket, and the fabric." He pointed to the piece of dark cloth on the table. Frank, his face still pale, but his posture hardened, picked up the fabric with his gloved hands. He sniffed it cautiously, his expression tightening. This smell, it's peculiar, sweetish, but chemical. We'll need an urgent forensic analysis. It could be crucial. Frank looked at the diary again, his hands trembling slightly. Gabriel Vasconcelos. He's not just an influential man, he's a monster. And Leah, and the baby. His voice trailed off for a moment, rage and sadness evident in his eyes. Clara lifted her face, tears streaming, but a new determination began to gleam in her swollen eyes. "He will pay," she murmured, her voice hoarse but firm. "He will pay for everything he did. For Leah, for my grandchild." The pain was immense, but rage gave her a strength she didn't know she possessed. Corvus hadn't led her there to give up. Frank nodded, placing the diary and locket into transparent evidence bags. "We'll ensure that, Clara. This is undeniable. Leah's diary, her locket, the location. Everything points to him. And Corvus's testimony, though it can't be used in court, guided us to all of this." He picked up the radio. "Frank to Torres, we need you here. Expanded perimeter, total area isolation. We've found crucial evidence, and we need a forensic team immediately, especially for the fabric. It's urgent." Torres's voice crackled, full of surprise and readiness. "Understood, sir. On our way. Any resistance?" "None. The cabin is empty, but what we found here, and it's explosive." Miller stood up, helping Clara to her feet. She staggered a little, but steadied herself. Her eyes swept the small room, now no longer a place of mystery, but a sanctuary of painful truth. She imagined Leah writing those desperate words, her last hope for justice. "What happens now?" Clara asked, looking at Frank. Frank sighed, the gravity of the situation weighing on him. "Now the hard work begins. We have the evidence. But Gabriel Vasconcelos is a powerful man, with many resources and connections. He will do everything to suppress this, to discredit the investigation. It will be an unprecedented legal and political battle." "I don't care," Clara replied, her voice gaining strength. "I will fight, for Leah, for Corvus, for everyone he hurt." She touched the evidence bag where Leah's locket was kept, feeling a deep connection to her lost daughter. Miller placed a hand on Clara's shoulder. "We'll be with you, Clara, every step of the way." The distant sound of sirens began to echo through the forest, breaking the oppressive silence of the cabin. Torres's team was arriving. The truth had been unearthed, but justice, that indeed, would be a long and arduous journey. The game hadn't just reached its climax, it had transformed into a war, and Clara was ready to fight. Corvus, in some way, had fulfilled his dying wish, and now it was up to her to honor his memory and Leah's, ensuring that the monster was finally exposed and punished. Clara's heart still ached, but the flame of hope for justice burned stronger than ever.